This, in my opinion, is the greatest karting story of all time. It's a story about a talented young cartoonist brawling with a communist Hungarian custom agent, racing a king, dealing with English bureaucracy, and driving in the Sahara desert and across India, as well as joining a circus and much, much more. It's a true adventure like no other. This is the saga of Stan Mott and his 4-year journey across the world in a kart between 1961 and 1964, all for a bet. The payout, a cup of coffee, obviously. Stay with me, this is a story worth hearing all the way through. So you'll forgive me, this whole story feeds into an area of my brain that longs for nomadism and adventure. I'm the son of a Romany traveller, after all, and being a karter as well. If I seem overexcited, this is exactly why. It hurts me how much I love this story. The freedom, the liberty, a story free from the hand of the ever-growing state grabbing tight on your coattails. Well, almost. A story that is so big, so extraordinary, that I can't possibly cover all the details, but please join me as I sit in this wonderful 1957 Austin A35, because why not? Strap in, or don't, because, well, karts don't have seatbelts after all. So, who was Stan Mott? Well, Stan was a well-respected, incredibly talented cartoonist, an eccentric of the best kind. His amazing artwork appeared in Road and Track magazine and National Lampoon, as well as other magazines of that era. The following adventure was just one of many that Stan went on, but maybe his most epic. So let's begin. Working for an ad agency, doing funny drawings at the time in 1961, during a coffee break, Stan and the other cartoonists working got talking. A heated debate ensued. Predictable, get creative people together, debates will happen. None of us will see the world until we're 60, and we'll probably have to do it in a wheelchair, said one of the members of this cauldron of debate. Stan, who was around 27 and 28 at the time, stated bluntly, "You can do whatever you want, if you want it badly enough." Dangerous words to express to anyone inclined to bet you that you won't put your words to the test. Stan never detailed exactly how the aspect of the karting came into the bet, but during this exchange, the deal was laid out. Stan was to drive around the world in a kart, all for a cup of coffee. And like that, it was on. Stan did a promotional deal with the US-made Blitz kart, to which he attached a small plywood trailer. What else would you need for an all-around-the-world trip, right? It's kind of mad to think that he's sort of venturing off and he's just got a small plywood trailer. At this stage in the story, Stan, writing for Agosi magazine, introduces Bill Davis. Now, this is a man who was going to join him on his adventure, which we will learn was mainly for the early stages of the European leg of it, and then they would separate and take their own paths. However, they would occasionally meet up and bail each other out of situations in some kind of buddy system. How they managed to get in touch with each other, I have no idea. I don't think the karts had phones, obviously. So how they would contact each other while they were on the road in karts is, your guess is as good as mine. Now, Bill, or Dave as he was described in Karting World, or even Glenn as he was noted in Kart magazine, always with the surname Davis, was a maverick all on his own. I wish I know more about him. I think there's some suggestion in the Going Racing book by Alan Burgess that he was the originator of the idea of driving around the world in a kart, but I can't say anything more than that. I don't quite yet have the full story because there's so much, but thanks to the Herb Dickley archive assembled by Scott Elks and posted on the British Historic Kart Club group, we can understand the story in quite a lot of detail. What we know about Bill is he had already been adventuring in a kart, in Karting World, which was a magazine back then. He'd been writing about it since January 1961. He had committed to another 6-month adventure starting in Hollywood Boulevard to join Stan. So details beyond that are kind of unclear. So maybe the adventures were documented somewhere, and this caught the eye of someone at the ad agency that Stan worked at, and this is where the idea formed of taking a kart around the world. So it wasn't totally a random idea picked from the ether. How else would Stan, otherwise not experienced with karting, know about Bill? Did he invite Bill, who then drove from California to New York to meet him before venturing across the Atlantic? We just don't know. Now, Bill drove around in an Echo kart, possibly the Spider model, Those familiar with the original kart manufacturers back then will know of them. With this kart, he drove across America to meet Stan, where the pair, possessed by an enormous sense of adventure, boarded a Yugoslavian freighter with one-way tickets and 2 non-road registered karts, I believe. Something later on which would cause Stan a big headache when he arrived in England. That's the bureaucracy element I spoke about earlier. Stan, on arrival in Italy, thought this would be a brief trip. He thought he would drive about a bit and go home. The bet had taken him this far, but he wasn't as of yet fully committed to it. He couldn't have imagined that he'd eventually clock around 38,000 miles, visit 28 countries, and spend a grand total of 3 years away from home. You'd have thought Stan would have spent some time learning the ropes with a kart, but nope, the port city of Genoa was where he would get his first taste of driving this kart. Thanks to Bill, he learnt all the controls and what to do, which was, at that specific moment, to drive over the 16th century cobblestones. 5 minutes later, he stopped. Jumbled vision, ringing ears, and a pain in the back. The reason. He stood up and he stared back at his kart. He didn't even think he'd make it out of the city, let alone the rest of Italy. At this stage, a crowd had formed, shouting, "Gira el mondo, around the world, around the world." Obviously, word had gotten out about this adventure. How? We don't know. But when Stan told them it was all a big joke, Bill reminded him that they were broke. Bill was right. Stan had $1.65 in his pocket, and that was that. There was no way home at this stage. Fortunately, the Genoa Kart Club were sympathetic. Again, how did the kart club know that they were there? Who knows? Maybe they called them beforehand. I don't know. But it doesn't matter. They sorted the pair out with a big lunch and were connected with an influential friend in Turin. With their karts, they headed out. But it wasn't long before the law caught up with them. "Impossibile!" shouted one of the policemen, who was driving up alongside them in a sidecar. They pulled over. Stan and Bill tried to explain their adventure that they were on, obviously without much luck. Luckily for them, and my word, Stan seems to be a super magnet for luck, a £250 artist named Caesar, who was miraculously on the scene, took sympathy with the lads. He used his robust voice to argue with the police. His vocal dexterity, more than his powers of argument, was probably what won it, according to Stan anyway. Free from the police, the pair had gained a new follower, and more importantly, another fabulous Italian meal. A succulent Italian meal, courtesy of Caesar. Now, leaving the restaurant where they just feasted, they were left with a dilemma. It was night, and their karts didn't have lights on. Not to worry, Caesar's Fiat 500's headlights were plenty enough to drive to Turin at night. So we've got 2 karts and a £250 man in a Fiat 500 driving 150 miles from Genoa to Turin in darkness. What? Naturally, they started slowly, as Stan was the only one with goggles, Bill following closely with Caesar following behind. Caesar, not satisfied, languishing behind in last place, sped up and thumped his hand on the door as he pulled alongside Stan. Not wanting to lose the benefit of the headlights, Stan sped up, with a little help from Bill, giving him a bump from behind. Bump drafting on a public road, in a car, at night, with no headlights, is as crazy as it sounds. I can't believe it's true, but somehow it is. The fun and games continued throughout the night, not without a few near misses with oncoming traffic. Stan describes this bit as tame compared to the frenzied moments of driving through the villages. Foot on the gas, lean left, watch that bicycle, right, dodge these people, all while Bill never left his tail. Bear in mind, we're still at the start of this journey of the around the world trip. This is just the beginning. Terrified and exhausted, they finally reached Caesar's studio in Turin. Exhausted, Stan lay on the floor. Who wouldn't be absolutely shattered after that? Caesar, obviously, still in high spirits, got straight on the Chianti. "Are we not alive?" he shouted. At this moment, Stan forgot about quitting. He was having too much fun. The pair of Bill and Stan somehow ended up at Pista Rossa, kart track in Milano, where Stan totaled his chassis. He stacked it into a hay bale. His Power Products powered blitz kart was no more. Thankfully, with the help of Magazzini Rossi, Sorry for the Italian accent. Presumably the influential friend in Turin. He replaced it with an Italkart Zoom, which was fitted with an extra tubular front and rear bumper, Perilla headlights, a 2.5-gallon Enduro fuel tank, a 1/4-inch steel plate that extended across the bottom of the chassis rails and acted as an engine mount for the new 175cc Lambretta 4-speed engine with reverse gear. As Bill noted as well in his writing, the Lambretta was superb and well suited to the kind of journey that both of them were going to be going on. Certainly an improvement of what they had on the karts before. With the two karts sorted and ready to go, the pair toured Italy and France for the next 5 months, with little more than a few hundred lira or francs in their pocket at any time. The pair told reporters who did a TV segment while in France that they were doing it in aid of Humour for Peace. I never heard of that before or after, but the police would stop them occasionally, but nothing was a serious issue until Stan set his sights on driving in England. I say, you can't drive those things here. Welcome to England, Stan. Upon arrival, this quick altercation with a Dover customs officer led to Stan and Bill's karts actually being impounded by the authorities. Stan didn't have insurance, and well, that was that. It didn't matter that they'd adventured across France or Italy. This is England, and well, you need the paperwork. As two burly men arrived to take the karts away, Bill decided he had enough and convinced them to return his, as he promised to take himself and the cart that he owned back on the ferry and back to mainland Europe. Stan, however, was determined to drive his cart on English roads by any means necessary. They said their goodbyes and would go on their own way, occasionally meeting up over the next few months and years. With his cart now impounded, Stan hitchhiked to London and spent 2 weeks trying to get insurance. Somehow the BBC got wind of what he was doing and paid customs to release his cart to film a piece for the Cliff Micklemore programme. The publicity didn't help Stan at all, really, and he was left with his cart and 90 miles between him and the ferry. How would he get to Dover without getting arrested? Well, thanks to a fellow American, Carl Bonner, who he was eating with at Wimpy. Remember them? I remember. Now, we'll meet Carl later on in the story, funny enough. They came up with an ingenious of sorts plan to disguise the cart using cardboard. Yep, cardboard. So, with an old TV box, some masking tape, wire coat hangers and a dark matte primer, they managed to create what looked like a car, I guess. With Danger Experimental emblazoned on the side, Stan was ready to hit the road at 3 a.m. What a plan. So, careful to not stick his elbow out through the cardboard, Stan managed to make it to East Croydon, where he saw a lonely Bobby on the beat. Hiding in plain sight, so to speak, he decided to stop and ask directions. The policeman asked about the vehicle. Stan replied, "Experimental, government project." The policeman looked at him. "On your way then." It had worked. Somehow. Stan knew he had to get to Dover before dawn. So as quickly as possible he made his way there. Unfortunately it rained, and well, cardboard and rain don't mix. It's England after all, should have expected it. By the time he got to Maidstone, a fair chunk of the bodywork had just fallen off. A trail of cardboard followed him. By Folkestone, most of it had gone. He was exposed and late. He reached Dover, but it was light and he was spotted by two bobbies. They signalled him to stop, he didn't. One gave chase, but Stan floored it and managed to board a ferry, not a second too soon. The gates closed shut and he was away as the ferry departed. Now, one thing to add here is the picture of a policeman appearing to write a ticket or report next to Stan's cart with the wet and manky cardboard fairing just about hanging on. So it looks like Stan did actually get an earful from a policeman in what appears to be Dover before boarding a ferry. He didn't write about that, but it is pictured, so make of that what you will. Now, the funny thing here is we did end up having road registered karts in England in the 60s. Buckler made one, Phantom made one as well, and the Windmill Girls were pictured or filmed driving through London in a pair of them, which is, I just think, is incredible. It's something I've got to follow up on. But back to Stan. His English ordeal was done, and he was thankful to leave England behind. The Sahara Desert lay ahead. By December 1961, Stan had made his way to Morocco, travelling down through Europe. There he met up with Bill again, whose cart was worse for wear and was soon about to head back to America. We also know and this was documented in Going Racing by Alan Burgess, a book from 1968, that the pair were joined by Carl Bonner, who we'd met earlier, and he was driving a Progress kart. He ended up towing Bill's kart and trailer 85 miles to Gibraltar, but after this we don't know what happened to Carl and his journey. But we've got 3 guys with karts and trailers touring Europe. It's amazing. For Stan, however, the Sahara Desert lay ahead, south, and he wondered if his kart could make it. He stocked up with supplies in Marrakesh, fuel, a cache of survival food donated by some GIs located at the Benjinir SAC base, and what turned out to be the most useful item for him, an Arabic galiba, a hooded, loose-fitting robe ideal for driving through arid landscapes. The Marrakesh Kart Club gave him a farewell dinner, for, as they put it, a man should have at least one last good meal before being lost forever in the Sahara. Stan had managed to cross the Atlas Mountains by nightfall. It was a bitterly cold first night, followed by a blazing hot morning. The heat didn't faze the car, and Stan clicked the miles off. Though it was not without dramatics, his car, with Stan aboard, would often find itself flying through the air as roads abruptly ended and he had to go over some rocks and that kind of stuff. Locals would always pop out of nowhere, but were friendly and polite. They would often prove helpful when Stan needed help to fix a tyre. The kart was such a novelty, it could only bring joy to those that set their eyes upon it, apart from English lawmen, of course. How much Stan experienced of the Sahara Desert, I'm not sure, but within Morocco, he travelled throughout Ouarzazate, Tasnor, before stopping in Tarident. I hope I did okay pronouncing those. While there and resting in a cafe, a Land Rover pulled up and asked him to get in. The Minister of the Interior had requested to meet the owner of this vehicle that had been traversing the Moroccan landscape. Stan spent the evening with him in a plush villa. He even talked the minister into siphoning 5 litres of fuel from his Jeep so he could continue on his merry way, in exchange for some Jane Mansfield postcards. Stan's goal for 1962 was Moscow. Yes, Russia. By March, his car was back in Europe and driving over the icy roads of the Swiss Alps. The Italian Alps had already posed some quite significant danger to him, and Stan had actually blew a piston and a cylinder when he was shifting hard in an emergency, trying to avoid falling off the road and maybe down a mountain. Arriving in the village of Arth-Gadau, he staggered into a restaurant to thaw out. Naturally looking a bit odd, a group of circus performers howled with laughter when they spotted him. They assumed he must have been some kind of clown. He was wearing a shawl around his head that he sort of was trying to keep his head warm. He must have been quite the sight. As so common in this story, one thing led to another, and well, he ended up as a clown in the Stew family circus. He would play an American cowboy chasing people in his cart. Obviously. This is where he met Christine Andre, an equestrian who come June and better weather would join Stan as he hit the road again. She would follow close on her Lambretta scooter. They toured Austria before arriving in Hungary, where things started to get a bit more serious for Stan. At the time, Hungary was part of the Soviet Union and Stan was an American in a cart. So, yeah, not without risk. At the border, he was granted a 3-day visa and drove on the roads towards the capital. He described them as rougher than anything he'd found in the Sahara. He described life was heavy for the locals who were living under communist rule. The sight of an American driving a cart must have been a welcome interruption of what must have been a very hard life for many of the people that lived there. Stan found out that they loved American cowboys, and he would pass out cowboy badges that he had kept with him from his time in the circus. The locals helped him tour Budapest. However, a trip to the customs office was required, and here things got dangerous. They were late, him and Christine. Upon arrival, quite the sight lay before them. Forget the cowboy badges, Christine told him. Schnapps bottles lay strewn on the floor, and leaning up against the wall were 2 customs officials, clearly inebriated. From another room came howls of laughter. Entering cautiously with their passports, the men in there fell silent. A minute passed before they realised they were looking at an American passport. American! Ah, American. An officer who stood up said to him, pushing his thumb into Stan's chest, communist. Reaching out as if to offer a handshake to Stan, Stan reciprocated, except the handshake wasn't that at all. The officer grabbed his arm and tried to jam it behind his back. Stan jumped back, freeing himself. The other officials laughed. The bartender, as Stan puts it, a man who must have been supplying the men with drinks and was present, wasn't drunk like the other men, and he tried to intervene. He was pushed back. The official who instigated all this assumed a boxer's stance, east versus west. Stan backed himself up against the wall. The other officials realised at this stage it was getting a bit out of hand, but the man wanted a piece of American flesh and swung a fist in Stan's direction. Stan ducked, causing the official to slam his fist into the wall. Obviously worse for wear due to drinking. The man was pretty much gassed out already. Stan thought his chances of escaping were dumb, however. While the other officials grabbed the man that had just attacked, Stan, the bartender, saw an opportunity. He grabbed their passports, Christine's and Stan's, stamped them, took them outside, showed the stamped passports to the soldiers present and sent them on their way. Go quick. Tomorrow, big trouble. Go now. Stan gifted the bartender one of his cowboy badges, and the bartender replied to him, putting his thumb at his chest, "No communist." Having survived this ordeal, Stan and Christine managed to escape Hungary without any further incident. But they both would be back inside the Iron Curtain within a month, this time in Warsaw, Poland. He wanted to travel to Moscow, but the only way they were allowed would be by train. $25 a day, and bear in mind it's 1962, it was just too expensive for the pair, and Stan and Christine headed back to Western Europe, where they would stay for the next 8 months. The pair eventually arrived in Crete, down to the last track, where they were adopted by a family of grape pickers who lived in fields near Nia Alikanossos. He doesn't say in his writing, but I assume that these were the Romani people on the island, because he said that they lived in the fields. So that's kind of cool that he was staying with a Romani family. The cart was put to work, of course. It would serve as a mini truck transporting people and grapes to and from the fields. During the holidays, it would provide entertainment in the village square, driving around the water fountain that was there, and he would get chased by kids who had water pistols, who were all in fits of ecstasy. It kind of sounds really cool and good fun. 3 months had passed when their time in Crete came to an end. King Hussein of Jordan, a keen kart driver himself, had learned of Stan's adventure and invited them to Amman, where they could join in the races held at his private track. Presumably he would have seen them reading the sort of magazines that were coming out of America and Europe. Having been joined at that stage by Christine's folk singing sister, Michelin, they jammed all the gear in a VW Christine had picked up when they were travelling back through Switzerland. Stan followed them in his cart, which was now free from the extra weight of the trailer, which was in the VW. He could now easily keep up with them as they headed towards Anatolia. They had to stay in Istanbul, forced due to the Syrian revolution or coup that was going on at the time that closed the border, which meant they couldn't get to Jordan. They would pass the time entertaining as a group of folk singers. When the situation had died down, they headed southward. They entered Amman on a Friday and upon arrival called the Royal Palace. On the end of the phone, the person receiving it said, "You must immediately go to the airport kart track. His Majesty will be expecting you." 2 days on the road, night and day, had left them all a bit grimy, to say the least, and they were just about to meet a king. They needed a shower and a fresh set of clothes. The desk clerk at the Continental Hotel where they were going to stay must have had to rub his eyes in disbelief as he sort of witnessed these 3 foreigners waltzing in, one of which had just hopped out of a cart. "Showers, showers," they hollered. "We're meeting the king." They hurried up some stairs and into some shower facilities that they must have found or been shown to. Minutes later, they were fresh and they were ready to meet the king. But it was a sort of frantic few minutes to make sure they were ready. They arrived at the track shortly after and waited until a motorcade of military vehicles arrived, followed by a white Ford T-Bird with King Hussein at the wheel. I mean, how else would a man like that arrive? In gleaming overalls and boots, he was ready for a day's racing. A charismatic man who exuded an extreme amount of enthusiasm for karting extended his hand out to Stan. "How was the trip?" Stan shared his story, and the conversation soon moved to sports cars, more karting talk, racing engines, and just racing in general. King Hussein was a knowledgeable man, but they were soon interrupted by a whistle. The racing was about to start. "Get your cart and we'll give it a go," King Hussein said to Stan. Stan's cart had travelled thousands of miles at this point, been driven on some of the worst roads Europe and North Africa could throw at it. But he managed to keep up in the race for a lap or two, which is a noble effort. Stan certainly had enough mileage under his belt at this point to be a very proficient kart driver. Maybe the most mileage driver, kart driver in the world at that point. But King Hussein and a few other drivers, they would battle for the lead, and eventually the first race was won by an Englishman employed by the airport luggage inspector. That's what Stan wrote. I wonder who that was. King Hussein won the other 2 races that day. He was a very accomplished driver, and his sort of karting story is worth a video all on its own. He sounds like quite the incredible character. When the races were done, Stan had finished plumb last in all of them, but his skills at the wheel had impressed everyone there, including the various diplomats from the very local embassies who were there in attendance. He gave them all cowboy badges, naturally. Stan and his folk singing companions spent the rest of the time exploring Jordan and the rest of the region: Bethlehem, Petra, Jericho, Jerusalem, the Dead Sea. I think he was in Iraq and maybe Iran, I'm not sure. He's on one of the pictures it says Iraq. But by the time they hit Kuwait, Michelin, she headed back home. Christine sold the VW, and then they bought passage to India. When they arrived in Bombay, which is now Mumbai. It was hot and humid. Christine hopped onto the trailer of the cart, and that's how they were going to set out. But really, 100 miles in, it was evident that this was just too much for the cart. It was too much weight. So in Pune, Christine hopped off and took a train to Madras, where they planned to meet later. A muddy and wet journey lay ahead for Stan. The muggy air meant nothing was ever dry, and he was constantly hounded by moths. Rest was difficult, but he arrived in Madras, where he would meet up with Christine again. Stan doesn't say much about India, but the journey sounded quite tough. But having completed India, he and Christine headed to Japan. The police there were very alert and would often stop Stan in his cart. Unsure what to do with Stan in his cart, the police in Japan would usually let him go. He'd show him a lot of documents that he had to hand, and they let him go. That was that. Like India, not much is said about Japan, other than the cart got clobbered by a truck and somehow survived it. What transport Christine was on at this point, I'm not sure, but by April 1964, Stan was back on American soil, back in the Anglosphere, and without Christine by the looks of it. So what happened there? Maybe she went back to join the circus. Who knows? We may never know. At this point, the cart had travelled over 35,000 miles, been driven on all manner of terrain, been dunked in the Atlantic Ocean. How? I don't know. We just know that happened. Experienced racing against the king, had been hit by a truck. It had consumed 25 tyres, 14 light bulbs, and had systemic replacement of electrical wires due to vibration and rot. The cart had been welded no less than 40 times and had dozens of other repairs, as well as all the other consumables you can think of, as well as destroying a piston and cylinder in the Alps. I guess it's testament that there was there's people out there that will help, and that's a cool part of the story. But most importantly, Stan had made it around the world in a cart. The entire journey, Stan had used plates given to him by friends or whatever he could make up out of cardboard. Was any of this legal? Absolutely not. But he had bluffed and cajoled his way out of so many situations. But America, surely this would be impossible. Like England, the American police were a little bit more on Stan's case about the legalities of the vehicle that he was driving about in. So he tried to get the car registered at the California Motor Vehicle Bureau, but to no avail. He wrote to 3 states requesting special plates so he could drive across the country, but to no avail. How Bill did this early on in the story is a mystery. But Stan being Stan, well, he just put some Swiss plates on his car and headed off on Route 66. A real American road journey. The trip was not without interruption. He spent 46 hours talking to police. He didn't get through one state without being stopped, but he managed to get on without being given one ticket, one fine, or even worse, jail. Exactly 3 years and 4 months since he departed on what pretty much was a joke at the time, he arrived back in New York. The cart was scheduled to be at the Cavalcade of Cars at the World's Fair. I think it was there, but I haven't seen any reference to it. But he had one more final mission to complete. That was to visit a certain friend at O'Henry's and get what was promised to him all those years ago, a warm cup of coffee. And that, friends, is the greatest karting story of all time. I would like to take this chance to give a special shout out to Colin Goodwin. The story first came to my attention earlier this year when I chanced upon a video on British Movie Tone, and I've linked that down below so you can actually see video of him in France, him and Bill driving. It's really cool. And I usually go down these these rabbit holes and find these videos, and that one popped up and I was like, I can't believe it, this is mad. But for reasons beyond me, which I can't understand, I never followed it up properly. However, a man who I recognise as another soul on my wavelength, Colin Goodwin, picked up on it when he was looking through a copy of his Going Karting by Alan Burgess, because Colin used to race karts. He's a very knowledgeable man. I've spoke to him. He's a great guy. So he wrote a piece for the Intercaller about the adventure. And like any top quality writer, he knew that this was a story, maybe the story. So I can't believe I didn't follow up on it on the time. And I have to say thank you for Colin for writing about it, because without that brilliant article, I don't think I would have made this video, because it was just like, wow, I can't believe there's so much to this story. So the account of this trip around the world largely draws from Stan's writing for Argosy magazine, with some extra details gleaned from Karting World magazine, where Bill, Dave or Glenn wrote a piece. How much embellishment there is in the account of this story, I'm not sure. Maybe there's some, but the pictures just don't lie. It all really did happen. And that's it. Thanks for watching. It's such an amazing story. Stan unfortunately died 2 years ago, so we're never going to be able to speak to him. And that's a tragedy. I would have loved to have spoken to him. And I wish I'd found out about this story 10 years ago. But Stan, Bill and Carl, you're legends. And thanks for doing it and giving us something that we can look back on and go, wow, what an amazing time to be alive.